Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2021 first stage. Call on either Deputy Breed Smith, Paul Murphy, Gina Kenny or Richard Boyd Barrett or Mick Barry to move for leave to introduce. Deputy Paul Murphy?
Yeah. I move. I'm sharing time. I'm taking 3 minutes and Deputy Smith is taking 2. I seek leave to introduce the Employment Permits Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2021. I want to thank SIPTU and the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland for their support for this bill and for their work, along with others, in exposing the abuses and exploitation of migrant workers and meat factory workers in particular, which this bill seeks to address. I'd like to also thank my colleague Deputy Smith and Owen McCormick, who put a lot of work into developing this bill. It is shameful that 90% of meat factory workers still to this day do not have access to sick pay. It was this time last year when I first raised in the Dáil how COVID was being allowed to rip through the meat plants. The government rallied to defend the beef barons, accusing me of smearing those companies. It took a sustained campaign by People Before Profit, by the unions and others to get the state even to inspect the plants and to discover that in fact there was a serious issue here. Still to this day, the government prefers to ignore the clear exploitation and abuse of workers in this sector, especially those migrant workers here on general employment permits. Many feel they have to go to work even with COVID symptoms, partially out of fear for their jobs, partially because they simply couldn't afford not to work. Despite a lot of talk, the government have still not done anything about this, forcing People Before Profit to step in with this bill of our own to begin to address the issue. Our bill would require the beef barons to provide sick pay by making it a condition for work permits. It will be an important step towards providing sick pay for all. Yesterday, the Taoiseach incredibly told me that the meat plants had already, quote, been dealt with, as if it was now under control. The truth is that the situation in the meat plants today is alarming. This morning's HBSC report shows 28 open outbreaks across the 56 meat plants in the state and 6 meat factory workers currently hospitalised. We've had literally thousands of meat workers catching this virus, with dozens being hospitalised and even ending up in ICU. The figures released do not say whether any have lost their lives, but we do know many will suffer with the long-term effects for years to come. And yet the Taoiseach claimed it's been dealt with. It's old news. It's clear which side he is on. One objection I would expect to hear from the corporate lobbyists is the claim that they simply couldn't afford to pay sick pay. But let's be clear, the beef barons could well afford to pay their workers sick pay, they just don't want to. A recent report stated, quote, 9 companies in the Goodman Group, ABP, made a profit of €170 million last year and had assets worth more than €3.45 billion. The bulk of those profits were booked in Luxembourg and were largely untaxed. Moy Park in 2019 had 1.8 billion turnover, 81.5 million profits. Dáil Meats 2.1 billion turnover, Keepak 1.5 billion turnover, and it goes on. Massive companies making major profits, yet refusing to pay sick pay, and the government refuses to make them. Ultimately, it will take a militant labour movement that forces changes, where workers become organised and assert themselves. But this bill does show what TDs can do to support these workers, and I'd encourage others to join People Before Profit in supporting and promoting this bill to force the bosses to pay sick pay.
Deputy Smith.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. I want to thank the OPLA for their help in guiding us through these measures. Employment permit legislation is very complex, difficult and labyrinthine, and it's deliberately so because it speaks of the state's attitude to migrant workers, which in many cases is one of generally barely concealing contempt. Getting a permit, renewing a permit and surviving here is not made easy by the state nor by many employers who are willing to use migrant workers' labour but unwilling to pay them decent wages or provide them with decent conditions. The entire area needs root and branch reform, and at the forefront must be the workers themselves. So I hope to see them organised in great numbers in trade unions in the next few years and joining with Irish workers in demanding workers' rights and decent livelihoods. But for the moment, this bill is trying to address an imbalance. It'll allow a number of other measures beyond what Deputy Murphy talked about. It would allow workers the right to change employers within the first year that they arrive here, and will strip employers of the huge power that they hold over these migrant workers. And the second one is that we'll give them access to the Workplace Relations Commission where their employment permit is not valid. We've had cases of workers being rewarded for unpaid and exploitative labour up to 90,000 by the WRC, but then of course the money can't be paid over because there's a loophole that says if the work permit is invalid, they cannot receive the reward. So this bill attempts to address that. Finally, I want to thank the staff in my office, but I also want to thank the participation and advice from SIPTU, from the Independent Workers Union and from the Migrant Rights Council of Ireland. Their help was invaluable, and we want to see this bill pass so that it will address and strengthen the rights of these and other vulnerable migrant workers.
Thank you very much, deputies. Is this bill being opposed? No, it's not being opposed, so the motion for leave to introduce is agreed. Deputy Smith, would you like to move that the second stage be taken private members' time?
I move.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you all very much.